Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I'd like to take a moment to discuss one of my favorite kinds of builds, and that is siege weaponry. Like many lifelong LEGO fans, I love the medieval and castle themed sets, but I'm often disappointed at the lack of siege options in the official sets. So for this video, I'll show you how to build one of the most versatile and long-standing siege weapons of the Middle Ages. A trebuchet is a siege engine that uses a long arm and counterweight to launch projectiles. Trebuchets were one of the most effective choices for artillery in medieval warfare, as they could throw much heavier projectiles and easily outrange earlier styles of catapults. Trebuchets were first used between 500 and 300 BCE in China, though its use spread to most of Eurasia and the Mediterranean by the 6th century. They featured heavily in medieval military conquests from the 7th through 14th centuries until the development of gunpowder-based siege weaponry. There are 5 basic parts to a trebuchet: the frame, the counterweight, the beam, the sling, and the guide chute. For the frame, we'll need to start with a base that will be wide enough to prevent the structure from falling forward or sliding when the counterweight is released. For this build, I'll be working with a base that is 22 by 29 studs in dimension. You can build one in any scale, but as a rule of thumb, you want to place the wider supports with about 1/3 of the base in front of the center pivot point and 2/3 behind it. This will ensure that the trebuchet remains upright when firing. Once the general shape is decided, you want to layer this until you have a firm framework for the upper components. Next, we want to lay out where we'll connect the upper portion of the frame. So we'll place some plates and jumper tiles to indicate their placement. The use of jumper tiles along one side will allow us to build the frame to accommodate for a beam of 1 stud in thickness, which will allow for a faster launch. Once these are in place, we'll build up the connection points using 1x2 bricks with a Technic connection point in the center. To construct the upper portion of the frame, we'll build 4 identical posts with Technic connection points at both ends and just shy of center. Next, we'll create the portion of the frame that will serve as the pivot point, or fulcrum, for the beam. And then we'll connect that to the 4 previously constructed posts, which will then lock into place on the base of the frame. Unfortunately, this results in a somewhat flimsy support structure. So to strengthen it, we'll add a support post to each side that connects diagonally to the main base frame. Our next step will be to construct the beam and counterweight. For the beam, we'll connect several long bricks layered with plates on bottom and tiles along the top for strength. We'll place Technic connection points at the end that will connect to the counterweight, and at a point a little less than 1/3 from the weight end. This will generate more velocity as the counterweight is released. At the far end, we'll attach a rod set at such an angle that will hold the sling in place until the beam reaches the desired release angle. For the counterweight, it's essential to build a container with enough space to load with as much weight as possible. The greater the weight, the greater the distance. I'd recommend using something metal for the weight. I use fishing weights, but you can use coins or any other heavy item that you can easily pack into the container. Once loaded, we'll attach the beam and then set it in place using a Technic axle rod through the fulcrum or pivot point. For our next step, we'll need to fashion a sling. First, I'll trace out a general shape of the sling on cardstock and cut it out. Then, using a Sharpie, we'll outline the stencil onto the fabric we'll be using for the sling. As I cut it out, note that I'll keep the material at the middle corners so that it will overlap to create a pocket. This will help to keep the projectile in place during launch. Next, I'll use a small nail to punch a hole in the narrow corners of the sling. Note that I'm using a block of wood underneath to protect the surface of the table. Now I'll attach some string through each corner. To connect the sling to the beam, I'll use a 1x2 plate with a Technic connection on the bottom side and loop a portion of the string through the connection point. And then attach the plate to the very end of the beam. Next, we'll make a pulley system to retract the beam back to the firing position. This cable will connect to the beam just below the sling connection point and close to the pivot point. Now we'll build a crank mechanism and guide chute. I'll start by building the guide chute using plates layered with tiles. At two of the bottom corners, I'll attach a 1x2 plate with a Technic connection point on the bottom side. Next, I'll build a frame with some 1x2 bricks with 2 connection points and some with 1 connection point. I'll combine some Technic axles together with 2 180-degree angled axle and pin connectors, and then thread them through the frame. On one side, I'll slide on a 16-tooth Technic gear, and then cap off each side with a Technic axle connector hub with 4 bars. Next, I'll attach a robot arm to another Technic axle connector hub with 4 bars. This will connect to the frame on the same side as the 16-tooth Technic gear and will serve as a braking mechanism. Now I'll knot a string with studded ends around a pneumatic connector with an axle connection. To this, I'll attach an axle and pin connector hub with 1 axle. The ends of the string will attach to the 180-degree angled axle and pin connectors on the crank axle. And I'll attach the guide chute to the frame using Technic pins and attach this section to the Trebuchet's frame. The last step will be to create a pin release mechanism. For this, I'll connect 2 bar rods through stacked 1x2 rounded plates with hollow studs. This will attach to a 1x2 plate with a Technic connection point on one side. I'll thread one end of a string with studded ends through the Technic connection point and knot it. The other studded end I'll build into a handle using plates and an ingot tile. Now all that's left to do is attach the pulley and crank cable using the release pin and crank back the beam. Once fully retracted, we'll load the projectile into the sling and place it on top of the guide chute. And now we take aim and pull. So there you have it. If you enjoyed this video, please give a like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what kind of siege weapon you'd like to see me build next. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy building.